Hi, this is Heather DeRome from the Sonatas and Partitas.com, and this video is about the G minor fugue BWV 1001. And we're only going to talk about the end of the fugue, and we're going to discuss it in terms of making a guitar arrangement. Now, I will say from my personal experience, the best way to get to know Bach's music is to actually make arrangements of it and move it from one instrument to another. Because when you're doing that, you run into questions and you run into problems that you don't run into when you are just playing the notes that Bach gave you. So one of the good thing to do when you're making an arrangement or when you're getting started arranging music is to look at arrangements that Bach made of his own music or arrangements that Bach's contemporaries made of his music. And so for this fugue, we're really lucky in that regard because we have 3 arrangements. Now, one of the questions that comes up invariably when you're making an arrangement is if we're going to add a note or take out a note. And if we are going to add one, which one do we add? And this fugue, again, it just gives us this little capsule of a bunch of really interesting questions in just a segment of a few measures. So let's have a look. So now here we have the lute version. Now this one was made in a tabulation by Bach, one of Bach's contemporaries. And we have an organ version, which we've transcribed here into guitar notation. And that one's by an unknown copyist. But myself, I do think that it was either done by Bach and copied or heavily influenced by Bach, because I find in a way it's somewhat more archaic and somewhat more sophisticated. And then the other version that we have is the violin version, and that's the one that we're starting from. So we've arrived at our dominant and arrived at the tonic. We have a tonic pedal. One more time the tonic. Now we're going to go up by step. And up again. And up. One more time. And then we get one more dominant, and there's going to be some ornaments back to the tonic. So in this chordal section, where on the violin Bach gives us a simple tonic pedal. Now both the organ and the lute version go like this. And falling back on the pedal. The interesting thing about that is that the rhythm of the bass line harks back to this section. But the difference between these two sections is that this section goes in a circle of fifths, whereas at the end, instead of going into a circle of fifths, we've landed home and we're establishing our home. So it keeps falling back onto the tonic. Now going on, the lute version does this. Now I find that is very interesting. And I find it interesting in light of the rule of the octave. Now, in the first video that I made about this fugue, I discussed the rule of the octave. And you could say that at the very heart of the rule of the octave, the reason for the rule of the octave's existence is to separate between music at motion and music in motion and music at rest. So you have music that's going somewhere, and during that time is when they used what we now call inverted chords. So chords in first position, in first inversion. And music at rest is when they used what we now call root position chords. And for them it was chords with a fifth and third above the bass. So we've inherited that, and we still ascribe to it, but not fully. And where we really ascribe to it is we want root position chords for music at rest. And so, for example, if I would play an old country song and I would go, well, I've gone a dominant and a tonic in root position, and it really feels like I've landed. But if I was going to go, well, it wouldn't feel finished. We would want it to go. So we do relate to that. We want root position chords for music at rest. but they also related to it inversely. So for example, we could go and we could buy that. We could say, yeah, the last two chords are when it ended and the other chords were when it was moving. But they didn't. For them, this was all very, it just kept landing. It didn't have this like fluid sense of motion. But now the thing is, this started changing in Bach's time. And this was one of the reasons, I think, why Bach was called old-fashioned, because during his time, people did start using root position chords more during music that moved. And so here we have somebody a generation younger than Bach who went, and he's got our root position D chord. And then, to me, like, if somebody presented that to me, I would be tempted to say, you shouldn't be plunking root position chords in the middle of phrases. But here somebody from Bach's day did it. So I just think it's really illuminating. But we'll see when we come to the organ version how it was dealt with differently. The other, I'm going to call it a problem that I see with the lute version, is that the bass, which there's a bass pattern that started here, and it's very clearly the same as this bass pattern. But here, when we continue at the end, the bass pattern doesn't continue. So when I hear that, like, I'm expecting that kind of motion and I'm not getting it. What I have seen in some guitar arrangements is that they keep the lute version, because that's what guitarists know best, but then they put this bass note. Now the trouble with this bass note is we want that bass note later. Like, we want it when we come across the bar line. And so if you do it ahead of the bar line, it sounds like, instead of like doing this thing and then you're landing there, it's like you're kind of landing ahead of time and then you're redundantly repeating it. So let's look at what the organ version does. So they have an inverted chord, a sixth above the bass, which is what they used in Bach's day for music at motion. And then to keep that bass rhythm going, and then land back on the pedal that keeps going. So that was the purpose of this video. I wanted to go over that and show how different arrangements worked. I do think that this is why I say that in a way Bach's is a little more archaic and a little more sophisticated. It matches more what goes on earlier. I mean, not necessarily Bach's, but it's why I believe that Bach had an influence in this one, because it's just so well done. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope it might be helpful to you when you're making your other guitar arrangements, that when you see music in motion and you might notice that you could put a root of a chord under it, maybe think twice about it before putting that root under. Maybe the lowest note in the measure is often Bach's intended bass note, and it does work with the rule of the octave, the sense of the music moving forward. If you'd like to find out when new videos are uploaded, you can subscribe to our channel, turn on your notifications. If you'd like to buy copies of the score, they're available at our website, both in single volumes for the different sonatas and partitas, and as a full collected volume. If you'd like to find out ahead of time when resources are added to the website, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and that's all available at Sonatas.